Okay, folks. Are you, if I can get a thumbs up or a hooray or yippee if you can actually see the moon live at this moment in time?
We can.
Excellent. Okay, that's good news. Let me just see if I can adjust the exposure a little bit. Okay, that's overdone it. Thumbs up or hooray or yippee if you can actually see the moon live at this moment in time.
Yep, we can.
Excellent. Good news. Let me just see if I can adjust the exposure a little bit. I'm not too sure how long the clouds are going to play ball, but I think I shall leave the moon up for a moment and just explain what's going on. Let me just leaving the whole thing back on view again. Okay. So, welcome everybody. This is Caithness Astronomy Group's first attempt at live streaming telescopic views of the moon. So welcome Astronomy Group members and those that are non-members that have joined us via Facebook. What you can see at the moment is a view of the moon from my back garden in Thurso. So it's viewed through a relatively small amateur telescope. And what I intend doing shortly is just talking through some of the features that you can see on the moon, either with the naked eye or through a telescope. So just enjoy the view for the moment. I have to say, half an hour ago, it didn't look like we were going to get anywhere because there was heavy snow falling, but we seem to have managed to grab a gap in the clouds. So hopefully that will last for the next 15 minutes or so, and I can talk a little bit about the view of the moon that you can see just now. So for members that are joining through the Zoom app, if you want to mute yourselves, that's fine. Just to make sure there's no background TV noise or anything. But feel free to unmute and pitch in with any questions of that. There's a little bit of cloud moving over the moon just now. That's why you're seeing it dimming. So I'll just brighten the view a little bit. Okay. So, what can you see when you have a look at the moon in the night sky? Well, you'll probably realise that sometimes the moon appears as a full disk, sometimes as a half a circle, and sometimes as a crescent shape. Now, the reason for that is because we are seeing different percentages of the side of the moon that is illuminated by the sun as the moon orbits or travels around the Earth. So tonight, the moon's about 75% illuminated. So hopefully you can see from the image here that it's roughly halfway between a full disk and a half circle. So roughly 75%. And what hopefully you can see as well is some of the surface features. Sorry, excuse me. Not a very good timing, a frog in your throat. Hopefully what you can see is some of the surface features of the moon. You'll notice that the moon has some dark areas. If one of the members can tell me whether they can see my cursor on the screen, stick your thumb up or down. Excellent. So There's dark areas on the moon, there's brighter areas, and you'll see there's some prominent craters. So even at low magnification, you can see all of those features quite clearly. And to the naked eye, you can definitely pick out that there's dark patches and bright patches. So let's zoom in a little bit and show you some of the other features that are visible. Let me just get a slightly closer view. Just bear with me while my frostbitten fingers try to operate the laptop. So hopefully what you can see now is some of the craters are much more obvious on the surface of the moon. So there's a very prominent one there. This one's called Copernicus, and another prominent one there named Plato. So you'll probably recognise those names. You tend to find that features on the surface of the moon are named after things you've probably heard before, like Greek philosophers, scientists, and the like. This dark area here is a large impact basin, and that impact basin is called the Sea of Storms, I believe, if my memory serves me right. And up here is an area called the Bay of Rainbows. Now, some of this is quite appropriate considering the weather we're getting at the moment. Let me just try and brighten a little bit so these features become a bit more obvious. So that's overexposing some of the other parts, but hopefully what you can see now is this sort of part circle here. Now, this was at one point a very large impact crater. But what's happened is when this impact here happened, and it led to a lava outflow that generated this very large area of flat lava-based rock. You can see there, a part covered up this rim part of the crater, perhaps because this part of the crust also sank a little bit in this direction. So although you can see some very obvious circular craters here, there's much bigger impact zones like this one here and the one here that forms the well-known Bay of Rainbows. Now, you're probably wondering why you can see a white patch here at this white curve when the rest of it is black. It's almost like there's a white strand sticking out into space. And what's happening there is the rim of the Bay of Rainbows is elevated quite a bit above the surface of the moon, and the top of that rim, the top of that sort of mountainous part is actually in sunlight when the surrounding parts here are in darkness. So in other words, the tip of this has seen sunrise and is therefore lit up. So this is quite an interesting feature for us to see tonight, because you have to time it just right during the month-long phases of the moon to actually catch seeing this. Now, I would like to say that I had planned it, that we timed all of this tonight so that we would manage to see that, but it just so happens it's a coincidence that we've managed to spot it tonight. So definitely a bonus for us, I'm delighted to say. So just to give you a bit of an idea of scale, this crater here, Copernicus, is, I believe, about 100, just shy of 100 miles across. So we are talking quite a large impact to cause that. I'm just looking round, and It looks to me like there's a heavy snow shower coming. So enjoy what could be the last view of the moon for, unfortunately, I suspect, a good 5 or 10 minutes. So thankfully we've managed to get at least one view of it before it disappears in the cloud. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop sharing the view of the moon and put up a couple of slides just to try and illustrate some of the things that I was talking about there. So bear with me for a second while I do that. Okay, folks. So my intention tonight was actually to start off with this slide as an introduction, but because we were likely to only get fleeting views of the moon this evening, I thought I'd better try and cram as much viewing of the moon in as possible. So here we go. We have the intro slide, which I'm now going to move on from, because you've obviously gathered that we're live streaming the moon tonight. Just a bit of advertising before we move on and talk a bit more about the moon. There's going to be more Caithness Astronomy Group online events coming up in the next couple of months. So next month we're going to have an online talk available to the public on Friday the 12th of February, and that's on the Hubble Space Telescope. And we're going to do lots of Science Festival events during the month of March, where we're hoping, weather permitting, that we'll get plenty of observance sessions as well. So we will look at the moon again during that month, and hopefully talk in a bit more detail than we're going to cover tonight. And you'll be able to find out what's happening in the coming months via our Facebook page and on the website. Okay, so what's the moon made of? So I'm sure you're all aware it's not made of cheese, much as Wallace and Gromit liked the fact that it was made of cheese and they could have some when they visited there. It's actually a rather barren, desolate place, lots of rock, and that's about it. No trees, no water, no sign of life. Now, I've said no water, I mean no ponds or lochs or rivers or anything like that. As has been in the news recently, there is traces of water trapped in the rocks, which is obviously good news if humans are planning on setting up a base on the moon. So what can we see from Earth when we look at the moon? Well, we're certainly not going to see astronaut footsteps. You need to get up close and personal to see anything, even to see signs of the missions to the moon. You're talking about a very close orbit of spacecraft with cameras that can zoom in on the surface detail. But from the surface of the Earth, with amateur telescopes, there is quite a lot of things that you can see. So you can see, as I mentioned before, the dark areas and the brighter areas. So the dark areas are lava plains. They used to be, or they are referred to as Mare or seas, because back when people used to look at the moon many centuries ago, that's what they thought the dark patches must be. They thought it must be expanses of water. Turns out, obviously, we know differently now, but the name has stuck. So you have things like the Sea of Tranquility, the Sea of Serenity, the Sea of Storms, those different regions on the moon. So you've got those lava plains. you have craters, and we've seen a few on the close-up live views. So on the image here, on the right-hand side, you can see a fairly famous crater here, a crater named Tycho. It's named after the famous astronomer Tycho Brahe. And this one here is much bigger. It's Clavius. And what you can see is there was a large impact that formed a new crater. That crater, the floor infilled with a flat lava plain, and then there was subsequent impacts that formed smaller craters within it, and that's what you're seeing there. So lots of craters on the surface of the moon, and craters are essentially the scars left behind when large chunks of space rock impact on the surface and damage the crust. So you can see here an idea of what happens. You have a lump of space rock coming in at high speed, impacts with the surface of the moon, generates a big hole and throws out material all around where the crater has been produced. The other thing that you can quite often see is mountains. So you can see a curving chain of mountains there, and running up here as well. And there's some isolated mountains in these regions as well. To give you an idea of scale, this mountain here is Mons Piton, and is about twice the height of Ben Nevis. So quite a large bit of rock sticking out above the lava plain here. So this is the Sea of Storms. And you can see the crater plateau there that I mentioned before. The other thing, there is other features that you can see on the moon, and there's lots of different ones. So if you're into geology, you'll probably recognise a lot of these terms. Here you can see basically ridges on the surface of the lava plain. Here you can see faults have formed around the edge. So as well as craters, there's lots of other features that you can look at in detail if you have a telescope. I mentioned that the features of the moon are, well, certainly the main ones are named. So you have Mare, so the dark areas, named after seas. So Mare Imbrium, Sea of Storms, Sea of Serenity, and then the one that we're probably all familiar with, the Sea of Tranquility here. And the Apollo 11 mission landed somewhere about there. So on the southern tip of the Sea of Tranquility. And there's the Copernicus crater that we looked at earlier. So you can see where the Apollo missions landed. So that's where the 6 missions set down on the surface of the moon, and we have had 12 astronauts walking across the surface in each of those areas. So 2 in each area. So Apollo 11 there, and the ridge of mountains that we looked at earlier. So just to give you get your bearings right, there's Copernicus. There's a ridge of mountains running up from that area. So Apollo 15 landed there. So this was the area we were looking at in a bit more detail earlier. Copernicus, Plato, and then the mountain ridge in between. So the bad news at the moment is it is still cloudy. You can probably see just behind me, if I hold up my hand, I can hide the moon. It's starting to appear again. So you can see me just hiding it with my hand. It may it may join us again before we finish, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. So tonight, because technology has moved on a lot from the first images taken of the moon, and here's one of the first detailed ones of the moon taken by astrophotographer Henry Draper, so well over 100 years ago. So that was about the best that they could manage then, which was quite an accomplishment. Nowadays, even with basic equipment, it is possible from your back garden to manage to take images and even live stream them across the internet to show the detail on the surface of the moon. So there's an image here that shows the zone we were looking at earlier in a bit more detail. So you can see Copernicus there, Plato at the top. The Bay of Rainbows was about here. It was just a bit more in view tonight than it is in this photograph. And then stretching from Plato down to Copernicus, there is mountains that are really the leftover rim from this large impact basin here, which is now the Sea of Storms. So for those of you that are wondering what the setup is, the photograph in the bottom right is roughly the arrangement that I'm imaging with tonight. The big difference tonight is there's an awful lot more snow on the ground, and if my teeth start to chatter in the next few minutes, you'll understand why. It's a bit chillier than when I took this photograph. But the couple of images that you can see of the moon there were taken with this setup last month, and you can see the sort of thick crescent moon on the left hand side, and then there's a close-up here showing the Sea of Nectar. So this small impact basin here is the one that you can see in the left hand image down there. And there's a rather interesting impact crater there, Theophilus. Interesting because if you get a really close-up view of it, you can see that the central peak in the middle of the crater is actually made up of about 3 different summits to it. So it's a complex peak in the centre. Right. So for those of you that are wondering how can you get your own photograph of the moon, well, here's a few photographs taken through a telescope just by holding your camera phone up to the eyepiece. And Caithness Astronomy Group quite often have public sessions where you can come along and take your own photograph of the moon. But even if you don't have a telescope, you may have a bird spotting scope or perhaps even a set of binoculars. Why not put your camera phone up to the end of either the spotting scope or the binoculars where you would normally have your eye, point at the moon and see whether you can manage to take a photograph. It is very tricky. It's much easier if you've got a telescope on a stable mount when you're trying to do it. But if you can manage it, you can get some really fantastic detailed images of the moon. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second, and if those that are keeping an eye on whether there's any questions coming in, if you can do a quick scan and see, and I'm going to turn around and see if the moon is visible. In fact, while there's questions being contemplated, I'm going to see if we can target the moon again. So let me just try to get the moon back in view. Okay, so let me just realign. Right. Okay, so hopefully somebody's managed to have a look through the chat and that, and if there's any questions, do you want to feed them to me while I try and keep the moon properly exposed so that we can continue viewing it? Okay, any questions? Everybody quiet?
No questions so far.
Excellent, that's what I like to hear. Those are the ones that I can answer easiest.
So we have a question for you, Gordon. Someone has asked, can you see either of the poles in this image?
That's a good question, and I wish I knew the answer. Now, what happens is, because the moon moves in an elliptical orbit, and it's not, it doesn't orbit us in exactly the same plane as we orbit the sun, it is possible to see on occasion the South Polar region and the North Polar regions, albeit you're only kind of getting a glimpse of them at the very edge. Now, just looking at this one, I'm actually struggling a little bit to tell whether it's tilted in an orientation that we can actually see one of the poles. I'm kind of guessing, just from experience, I'm hedging my bets there. I'm not committing to anything. Sounds a bit like a politician's response, this one, but I'm kind of guessing that because that crater there, when I've imaged it before, it has seemed to be further from the edge. I'm guessing that the South Pole, which would be this end, the South Polar region is not quite in view. But I'm not sure whether it's kind of tilted enough that we're seeing the North Polar region appearing into view in any sort of detail. So I suppose the answer is I'm not entirely sure. I would have to check, but there is there's a very useful program that you can download if you have a Mac or a PC, and it gives you a very detailed map of the moon, and it will give you the view for any time and date, and you would be able to check that to see whether there is whether you're actually able to see the North or South Pole craters. But even if they were visible, you're really seeing them just foreshortened on the edge of the limb of the moon. So you're not going to get a good view unless you take a spacecraft and travel to there. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question reasonably well. Let me try and zoom in on those craters at the bottom there. Those ones are quite interesting. What you can probably see, looking at the crater there, Tycho, and the other crater, oh, I've jumped a bit further, apologies. So you can see the other crater there, Copernicus, and hopefully you can see faint lines coming out from those craters. Now that's you can maybe see a brightish one stretching up there from Tycho. Oh, we're overexposing now. Now what that is the ejecta. So it's basically the debris that has been thrown out when the impact explosion happened. And Tycho being a relatively recent impact, the ejecta is still visible, stretching quite far across the moon. It's actually that brightish line there is ejecta from the impact that caused that crater. So you can see it's stretching kind of like halfway across the moon. We're struggling a little bit here with the thicker cloud, but there are patches, so we'll hang on and see how we do over the next few minutes. So, are there any other questions before we wrap up this observing session?
No more questions in the feed right now, Gordon.
None at the moment. Okay, that's good, because obviously I didn't manage to fare too well with the first question. I couldn't give a definitive answer, but I'm sure there's folk out there Googling away at the moment to find out. So I think maybe going to get a clear patch briefly. So we'll try and finish the session itself with a view of the lunar surface, seeing as that's what we're primarily trying to achieve tonight. Are you able to pick out if there's many people have joined us on the Facebook feed?
There are a few. I'm not quite tech savvy enough to hunt them all down, but I can see a couple of likes and then messages from a couple of people.
Okay.
More than just us. We are not alone.
We're not alone. Excellent. That's good news. So for those that are not members, but you've obviously managed to find our Facebook page, which is good. You want to check back regularly over the coming weeks, because there will be details on other live observing sessions, and there will definitely be some presentations coming up over the month of February and March that you might be interested in. So do check back on the Facebook page for information on that. And there's also normally space and astronomy stories posted now and again as well that you might be interested in. Okay, so I'm going to be rude. I'm sorry, I need to turn around and see what the clouds are doing, so just bear with me for a second. Oh. Okay, so I'm sure what you can see directly above my head, it's not my head torch. The thing that I'm covering up with my hand there just now is the moon. The bad news is what you can't see on there is that it's covered over with cloud. So there's a patch of cloud that doesn't seem to be moving much. It's not very thick cloud, but you'll be able to see that it is somewhat ruining the view of the moon for us. But those are the challenges of doing astronomy in a place like Scotland, where the weather quite often doesn't like playing along. Although I don't suppose we can complain tonight, considering an hour ago I could barely see the end of the street because of the blizzard that was ongoing. So I think we've managed to be successful this evening in capturing this view of the moon. Okay, so I think at this point, if I can just get you to confirm, Ian, whether there's any questions waiting to be answered. And if not, I'll probably wrap up.
Just some people saying, nice job, Gordon, well done. As ever to our illustrious chairman.
Well, I'm glad it worked out tonight. Obviously, this is kind of the first time we've given this a go. Although we did do a little live feed during one of our member sessions, this is the first one that's went public. So it's good that we've managed to get some views streamed live for people to look at, and I'm sure they're saying that they are live because the clouds are moving across the moon. It's not. I haven't stuck a picture of the moon up on the screen and pretended that that we're managing to look at it live when we're not. But
We've had one thank you from Facebook as well, just saying thank you, very interesting.
Good. So for those of you that want to learn more about the moon, the plan is during the Science Festival to have a few more of these sessions, but in a bit more depth. So we'll be talking about different features of the moon. There'll be more information there, and hopefully we'll get to live stream it as well. But there will be a detailed presentation to go with it, rather than the very quick overview and snippets of information that I've provided this evening. So I hope you've enjoyed joining us this evening. The next planned event is on the 12th of February. So there'll be details posted on the website and on the Facebook page. And that night we'll be looking at the legacy of the Hubble Space Telescope. So for those of you that like fantastic space images, we'll be concentrating on what the Hubble has produced. Now we're not going to go through every image, otherwise we'll be there for about another 30 years.
30 years.
So what we will do is we're going to pick a selection and talk a little bit about them. But the main thing is there's going to be fantastic images to look at. So if you're at all enthralled by the Hubble Space Telescope images, then I would encourage you to join us on that evening. Again, it'll be open to the public. Plan is to live stream it, and you'll get the details posted on the Facebook group. So thank you all for joining, and I hope that you manage to stay safe and, judging by the weather just now, warm. And we'll see you again soon at another event.